I've been a fan of Maxo Kream's previous work. Punkin was his 2018 release. I think it was early last year that album came out. If I recall correctly, that did come out in January, February time of last year. I liked it quite a lot when it came out, but I do think I overrated it just a little bit. It wasn't quite as great as I initially saw it to be, but I did quite like his approach to trap. I mean, he's not your average trapper that you may consider to be like a traditional trapper, you know, like a Playboy Carti or maybe an Uzi or anyone else in that lane at the moment. But he kind of switches the flow of the style a little bit while being a bit more of like a rappity rapper. It puts a lot of people off, and I totally get that, but he kind of bridges the gap between like modern day rap music and your kind of traditional old head type rap that I think does give him quite a broad appeal. And what's broadening this appeal even further is the fact that this latest album is probably his most vivid album yet in terms of the lyrics. I've seen a lot of praise for Brandon Banks already for being incredibly detailed with his depiction of his life so far and his upbringing, being incredibly introspective with the way he describes events and the way things are. And I think those praises are completely valid because lyrically this album is pretty damn fantastic. He again kicks off this album, potentially could be a contender for one of my favourite songs of the year, to be honest, because I love his flow on this track. I think the way he rides the beat is incredibly like laid back, but it also feels quite harsh with the reality that he depicts as well. I think the mixture of how he says it and what he's saying, honestly, it makes it hit harder because at first you're just kind of nodding your head along to what's going on, you're liking the beat, you're enjoying it, but then it just kind of hits you, and I think that kind of is what he's going for here. He's just kind of trying to tell you that this is how shit is, and I'm going to say it in the most ordinary way I possibly can because it is just so ordinary to me. It's very impactful, and I think he's crafted a pretty damn great song here as well, with the beat and the flow, his chorus as well. It just all comes together really well. And it does set the tone for the album incredibly well, because you do have a lot of these tracks following a pretty similar formula, even though he does manage to switch up his flow quite a bit throughout. He's rapping about different things on each track, even though they kind of all point to the same issues in a lot of ways. And then occasionally throughout you get a harder knocking beat, which does kind of drive the momentum of the album quite a bit in a nicer way, because I just think sometimes his flows and his voice just gets a bit too samey for me. Luckily it has a few features to break up the flows a bit. You got Megan Thee Stallion, you got Schoolboy Q, A$AP Ferg. They all do a pretty good job on what they're doing here. Schoolboy Q especially, I think his feature it's depressing actually, because it just reminds me of how bad his album was earlier in the year, and here he is on Maxo Kream's song, putting out probably his best verse of the year. It's just like, where was this on your own album? Megan Thee Stallion is pretty good on her feature too. I'm enjoying Megan these days. I feel like we've still not heard the best. Even after I heard that freestyle that she dropped pretty recently, I still think that there's more to come. Like, she's hungry, she's got all this power hitting out at you, and yeah, I just feel like I'm waiting for it to burst and just everything to just go insane, and then that moment clicks and you're finally just like, that's the one, that's what I wanted, yes. But for what it is, it's pretty solid. I think the one feature that is not good on this album is the Travis Scott feature, just because of how out of place Travis sounds here, how out of place Maxo sounds as well. It's just not a worthwhile track. It's funny because I was thinking recently how Travis Scott just is not a worthwhile feature on any song, to be honest, these days. And then I saw a tweet that completely depicted everything I was trying to say in the one tweet, and it was that every time you hear a Travis Scott album announced, you get incredibly excited, you're thrilled, you want to see what he's going to come out with next, but then you hear he's announced on a feature on someone else's album, and you just shrug your shoulders because it's like, well, I don't care about this. And this is a perfect example of that. I mean, It's alarming how he just seems to take his same style and approach on every track he features on. Like, he really needs to be able to switch up his style to actually match the person he's with, match the song, match the mood. He never seems to manage to do it. He just seems to struggle to differentiate with his features. Like, you either have him as a feature and you make it work, or you just leave him off, because he's just not going to fit on it unless you make it work. And it sticks out really poorly when it doesn't work. And it almost never works. Throughout the runtime of the album, like I said, you're getting these bangers every so often. You got the Schoolboy Q track, which hits really hard. But the thing is that the other bangers on the album don't hit that hard, I don't think. So they don't really feel that much different to some of the more laid back tracks. Because as much as I like him, listening to him speak on a lot of his life issues and stuff, the beats just kind of get a bit bland when they kind of feel copied and pasted. So then when you get to a bit of a harder hitting track, you kind of want it to be hitting you in the face, but it just kind of knocks you on the shoulder a little bit, and you're just a bit like, oh. Brothers is the best example of this, I think, because like the beat is really dark and ominous when it comes in, and it just kind of loses its sort of momentum somehow. I think it may be the way that Maxo is rapping over this track, but I think he's just not really like intense enough to keep it going, to kind of knock you and just keep knocking you, but you're kind of just like, give me something more. And that's kind of what stops me from loving the album, I think. Just the way some of the songs sound, how they're just not really as impactful as I want them to be sonically, even though it works on me again. And it does work on the track Brenda too. I think that track is just phenomenal. But it doesn't always mesh together in the way I want it to, and it is a huge shame. But as I mentioned with Brenda though, this track is just so harsh, man. The way he's talking about the way his mother was brought up, which incidentally had a ripple effect on how he was raised, because her mother was a prostitute, and her father beat her mother as well, and then she ended up getting with a man who beat her, and then they had a boy who ended up being obviously Maxo, and just how all these things end up piling on each other, and the cycle continues. The same shit happens again, and you've got Maxo here who went through the same thing she went as a child, and it's just a depressing reality of the way life can be for a lot of families. You end up being a product of your own environment, unfortunately, and the way Maxo just depicts that entire story, he is just really nailing some of these lyrics. It is really harsh. Throughout the album as well, there are little lyrics here and there where he mentions about how his mother hates the fact that he looks like his father. It just constantly reminds her of him. Dairy Ashford Bastard, he comes out with a few interesting lines where he sort of recognizes the flaws of his father, but he still manages to praise him in his own little way, with the fact that, he still managed to pay the rent, feed his family before he was killed by the cops. But at the same time, he brings up the fact that he beat his mother, he cheated on her a lot, he just treated her awfully, and yet he still finds that glimmer of sunlight in his father and still manages to say, look, I love my father, and even though it feels like I'm a bastard because I grew up barely having a father around, I still have good things to say about him. Something very obviously I couldn't ever relate to, because, recognizing all the terrible things he may have done, but still bringing out a positive light in him, it just seems very strange to me. But again, you only have one father, so the way Maxo is speaking about this does make a lot of sense. You are gonna find the good in your own parents, aren't you? Just got me thinking quite a bit, something I don't really come across in music very often. And that's the thing with Maxo Kream. I think his lyrics are just that good that it gets you thinking that kind of way. And that's definitely what I like about Maxo Kream the most. I do think this is a good album overall. I think some of the tracks could just do with a bit of variation. It definitely feels like he's repeating a lot of his flows and his verse styles, over and over again. When you get a banger, they don't seem to bang hard enough. It's just a bit too much of deja vu when you get from one track to the next in the way that they sound. They just really need to switch up quite a bit, I think. But I'm going to go 6.5 out of 10 because I do think this is a good album overall. And let me know what you think of it as well. I think Maxo Kream is a top tier lyricist at the moment, to be honest. Not many of his contemporaries managed to tell a story the way he does, I don't think. So he's very, very impressive, I think. Thank you for watching this review. I look a bit sweaty today. My hair's a bit... Ugh, I'm sorry about that. It's like the hottest day of all time in the UK, and we just don't have the ability to deal with this, so I look a bit shit. But thank you for watching my review. Hope you enjoyed what I said. Have a good day. Goodbye.